Quebec turn. So they weren't able to make it, but they had they had asked to record it so they could watch it afterwards, and then even submitted like some questions
Great.
that I have that once we get into it I can ask you. But the group here, so it's Phil's team, Valley Forge Minutemen, right? As you're very familiar with. Uh,
Yeah.
and they are 12U, so 2012 birth year. Most everyone is 12 years old. We may have a couple that have turned 13 over the last couple months. They changed the body contact, the checking from when we used to play to first year Bantam. So one of the things that these kids are all now, I mean, they teach body contact, but next year they start checking.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
pretty,
Yeah,
so
that is different, isn't it, from
yeah.
when we were coming through? Okay.
Yeah, so pretty big jump. And I think we got a couple coaches here on the line. Mike is on, and I think maybe I saw Brad and I don't know who else is on there. It's tough for me to see. But Mike is he was at the bottom of my screen there, and he was I kind of talked to him a little bit
Yeah.
about you, and he's on stressing nutrition, uh,
Good.
and off ice training. The kids do off ice once a week, so he was nice enough to let us have a little time with everyone. So appreciate that, Mike.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think anytime we can get a specialist on, I think it's great. Somebody who's in it, who's involved in it. I think all the guys here on the screen like the fact you're wearing an Eagles jersey too. So
Yeah, let's go.
that'll go a long way with the boys here. No, I think it's always great. So, Michael, I'm glad that you could do this and help some of these boys. And the fact that you're going to record it, these kids are in tournaments. They're playing multiple games a day. Grab a chair. Playing multiple games a day. Um, so I think a lot of questions are around, fitness, around, what are the right things to eat before games? What are the right things to eat between games, the night before? So helping these kids, they're in that time of their age where they're between 12 and 15 years old, where they're starting to develop. So the right nutrition is going to go a long way for these guys.
100%. Yeah, I'd love to get into any of that you guys want to talk through,
Yeah.
Phil.
Yeah, great. Why don't I'll just start off too for everyone on the line, and then those that'll jump on and watch the recorded session, just to give you a little bit of Mike's background. So Mike is the professor and director of the Institute of Sports Sciences and Medicine at FSU, which, Mike, you started that, didn't you?
Yeah, so I started
Yeah.
at the same time. 2010 is when this place began. Yeah, that's when we moved down here. Yeah.
That I'll let you touch on that later if you want. Really interesting. Sounds like you do a lot of research there, with your students, but also with some of the FSU athletes as well. Mike is a certified sports nutritionist, certified strength and conditioning specialist. Grew up, as you can tell by the jersey, locally in Philadelphia. Multi-sport athlete, but Mike and I played hockey together since we were all of your age, right? Like 12 years old. Mike played for the Valley Forge Minutemen as well. So Mike and I had a couple years where we played on the Minutemen together. He went on and played college hockey at Skidmore College and also Eastern Carolina University. So he is a fellow hockey player.
Yeah.
He has gone through just about, if not more, everything that all you guys have gone through and will. One thing, Mike, just kind of before I hand it over to you, I did want to just mention kind of two things to the boys. About you and your path and how it all relates to the sport of hockey.
Sure.
First of all, and Mike, I know you've not heard this. This isn't the first time you've heard this, but like if you ask me, yes, but if you ask any player that has ever played with or against Mike Ormsbee, they will tell you he is the hardest working guy they have ever met. Period. Period. Still talks about till this day. Okay. I know I'm pumping your tires here a little bit, Mike, but it's very true. So just for the boys, like that is a trait that not only has benefit Mike in his athletic career, but obviously his professional career as well. So Mike was, when it was time, when we heard that whistle and it was time to get on the line and everyone's hanging their heads, Mike's head is up and is like, let's go. Let's do this. We got this. Because he knew that it was that kind of stuff that is what made him better. And ultimately, what made everyone on that team better, because that attitude and that mindset, it just permeated through the team and it created and reinforced such a positive culture, a culture of just wanting to push each other to make each other better. And as a result, Mike saw a lot of athletic success in his hockey career. Not only in college, but Mike and I played for a state championship together. So a lot of really cool stuff. And I think that's really the essence and the core of what having that kind of mindset can bring to a team.
100%, man.
And then in addition to that, I'd also like to say, just as it relates to the relationships in hockey, the values that Coach Mike and your other coaches are teaching you, outside of just the skills, all those translate into your life once you hang up the skates. So I would go as far to say that a lot of the success that Mike has seen stems from the values that he learned at an early age growing up playing hockey. Hard work, discipline, how to be a good teammate, and all those things that you're learning that you maybe shake your head every once in a while or you don't want to hear it. I promise you, those are things that you will carry with you for the rest of your life. So Mike is an example of really digging in and putting in the work early. Has to show for itself. So just wanted to add those two things there, Mike, before you get going.
Thanks, Phil. That's really nice to hear, man. Pumps you up on like you said, pump my tires up here on a Tuesday. Here's the thing for all the boys on the line, like I was never the most talented kid. I could hang, but my hands were never great. I didn't have that touch, but I could get there before you or try to knock you off it when I got there, and just think ahead. What's the next play? Where's my teammate going to be in open space? And it allowed me to have some success in a place where I probably shouldn't have, just because I might outwork you, but I didn't have the actual like skill. I didn't have the spidey sense hands, and I couldn't, do those little techniques that a lot of you guys probably have already. But you can get a long way off of that work ethic, like Phil's talking about. So I 100% agree with that. I mean, it's all set with that attitude, and you can't fake that. Like your coaches might try to drill it into your parents might try to drill it into you, but if you don't believe it, you're going to be dead in the water. It's got to be intrinsic, something coming from your own heart that you want to be better. You want to win that race. Like you said, Coach Phil is we were like best friends, but we get out there on a line or get play against each other, it was go time. Like both of us wanted to win that every time. And it's just that mentality for sure that carried over. But from a training perspective, off ice perspective, the on ice stuff is sort of taking care of you because you're going through drills and things that your coaches designed for you. The off ice stuff, perhaps I heard you have one day a week of this type of thing. But I'm curious what you're doing outside of that as well. At 12 years old, there should be multiple sports involved and multiple activities involved in terms of total player development. Because at this age, if you hyper specialize, you will burn out. Very few will make it through that gauntlet if you're only doing one thing. So I would definitely encourage free play. I would encourage fun. I would encourage different multiple sports or activities that you're into. And even though you want to be a pro right now, if you only do hockey, it will be a problem. Like the most successful athletes tend to do multiple things for a very long time before you specialize. So just keep that in mind as you go through all of this stuff, and make sure that you have some perspective on it. And the parents who are on the call or listening, like try to bring that perspective. It is a sport. It is for fun. It is for overall development. And because you guys are developing so much now, like Coach Mike said, like 12 to 15 years old, goodness, some of you are going to double in height in 3 years. Like it's going to be crazy. There's a lot of growing other than your infant stage when you're a tiny baby. This is going to be the biggest growth point in your life. And when you're an infant, you're eating every 20 minutes, every hour. You are constantly eating because you are growing so much. And in this next phase of your life, that's going to happen as well. And as you're growing so much to offset not only the longitudinal growth, but the thickness, your muscular development, if you're not taking care of these things in terms of protein intake, total calorie intake, feeding before practice, refeeding afterwards, you will be in trouble in terms of not in trouble, but you'll be in a place where you won't reach your potential for what you could be capable of. We can go down any of these lines, but
Yeah,
for
Mike, I
me,
think that's a good place actually, because what you just mentioned was a question that I think multiple people had around not necessarily protein intake, but like
yeah,
on practice days, on game days, when you're playing in those tournament weekends, when you got 4 or 5, sometimes 6 games over a weekend, like I guess the question is what should they be thinking about in terms of, when to eat, what to prioritize? And then that's not even getting into the sleep and all that, right? Because they're killing
yeah.
bodies. And how do you kind of, what should you be thinking about to refuel, not to mention you're on the road, so it makes it a little bit difficult as well.
Yeah, I mean, in that type of a setup, when you are playing that frequently, so you're talking about 6 games in 2 days, or is that
Yeah.
2.5
Yeah.
days?
Yeah, 2.5, usually 3.
Yeah, so you're looking at doubles every day,
Mhm.
but roughly like that's intense. And if you're in a place where with this sport, with all the intermittent sprinting, like it's different than a lot of other things. It's similar to some team sports, but it's not like endurance running or something. You are all out for 30 seconds and you get off the ice. All out for 30 seconds, you get off the ice. And that repeat sprint crushes how you store carbohydrates in your muscle, where you store glucose in your muscle, where you store sugar. Those are all terms that are synonymous: glucose, sugar, carbohydrates. It's all the same thing. And so that is something you will want to prioritize to restoring that glycogen, particularly for game 2. So if you have an early morning game, you're probably okay if you ate breakfast and had some carbohydrate in there. You're looking at fruit, you're looking at a bagel, breads, these oatmeals, these types of sources are just fine pre-game. You're going to burn through all of that especially because at this age, do they have, like, is there a fourth line scenario where you play very limited, or is everyone playing about the same amount of time?
Everyone plays about
Okay,
3
so
ish. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, everyone's in the same boat then, where you're gonna have to replenish those glycogen stores. And if you have a game within the next 2 or 3 hours, you need basically 2 things to be going on. I would have a liquid carbohydrate after a game. The reason is it's very easy to digest. It won't upset your stomach. You can get those carbohydrates in quickly. You're looking at about, for the parents on the call who want to do the math, you're looking at like 30 to 60 grams per hour is what you'll be looking to hit.
Of
Like
carbs.
of carbohydrates, yeah,
Mhm.
during those active times. So like during a game, even if it's an hour and a half long, I would be sipping on something in that amount of time. You don't have to be chugging Gatorades, because outside of this context, that's probably not the best idea. But
Right.
in this context, you're in a position where you're using carbohydrates, you need them back in, and they should be easy to digest, and preferably liquid, because that's just an easy way to get those in for kids who sometimes get picky with what they're eating and whatever. A
Mhm.
lot of them will drink something. And so that would be the pregame. Within probably 45 minutes pregame, I would be doing a liquid carbohydrate during the game, obviously, and then I would do that immediately post game. If you have several hours after the game, I would focus on a couple of things.
Hey,
One,
Mike,
immediately,
can I
yeah,
stop just, what would be an example of liquid carbohydrate? So that people know, like,
Gatorade, Powerade, some of those types of sources are just fine. I'm at FSU, so we can't use Gatorade, so we use Powerade here. So yeah, there's those are plenty fine. Like, we did all the work with sweat testing on FSU football preseason in their camps when it's 100 degrees, and so we're looking at what they're fueling with, and we're testing their sweat rates and stuff for these people who sweat a ton. These guys are huge, and they're using Powerade. If there's someone who they might be too young now, but in the next few years, you'll find out if they're really heavy sweaters or not. And you can see that you can't tell by smell in hockey. It's always awful. But if you look at their undershirts, if they dry and there's like a white crust to it and stuff, they're probably sweating and a little more salt than other people might be. So you have to look at the clothes and see how salty they look from the white stains on there and stuff. But that's where I would maybe shift to more or less sodium in that particular beverage. But for this age, Mike, just an easy thing is Gatorade or Powerade. Those are readily available just about everywhere.
Um, What about, I remember using drinking Pedialyte. Was that just like a stupid thing that my dad thought of while I was playing?
No,
Is that a real thing?
no, Pedialyte's actually fine. Yeah, it's a fine source as well. There are so many ways to do this, and if you look at like across the board, like for my mind goes to like sodium, potassium, like the details of what's in those drinks. They're all
Right.
fairly similar, and at this age, no one is likely sweating an excessive amount like you might have once they're a full teenager.
Mhm.
This conversation might be different, Phil, once we get to this talk in
Right.
5 years from now.
Yeah.
At this point, something generic will fit the bill here. Yeah,
Okay. Okay, cool. Marco,
yeah.
did you have a
So
question, bud?
Yeah. I was wondering about like what about vitamin water and energy drinks?
yeah, so most of the vitamin waters are made so that they're very low calorie and they actually don't have a lot of carbohydrates in them. So for this purpose, I wouldn't do vitamin water. And I also wouldn't do energy drinks at this age either. Those aren't also they're not designed to provide actual energy, they're providing caffeine. For me, energy is food. And you're looking at carbohydrates, proteins, and fats like a normal meal. The energy drinks that most kids or teenagers or adults are drinking aren't actually biological energy. They're caffeine drinks to stimulate your brain. That's we can talk about supplements in a little while because there is a place for them. I just wouldn't have them in this form or for this purpose.
Mhm.
We're talking about refueling carbohydrates because that's your primary energy source for your sprint activity during an ice hockey game.
Okay.
Mike, what about like night before nutrition? I know when we were younger, it was like big pasta dinners, that kind of thing. I mean, does that still play?
Yeah, it still works into the scheme of it. What it is it just doesn't have to be so extreme. I mean, you and I remember eat, God Lord, what we would try to eat before those things. The night before, if you're not purposely restricting carbohydrates, which I would hope nobody is in this group, that night before dinner should just be something usual because if you have a game the next morning, the last thing you want is an upset stomach. We always say like don't try anything new that close to a game because it could upset your stomach and then you're spending time in the bathroom instead of on the ice and nobody wants that. Plus you got all the gear on, it's a pain in the butt to get all that off and go to the bathroom. So I would just do something plain. The pastas are good, Phil, with like the chicken, rices, potatoes, like something that the kids enjoy. I would stay away from like French fries though, like fried foods, because that's been known, at least in that time frame, to have a little different effect on what I'm talking about here. This is just fueling the muscle for exercise, and we can talk about protein next, but the carbohydrate piece is what fuels your activity during an ice hockey game. That's what
Yeah.
you need to have on board. So that's your pasta, your potatoes, your fruits are great sources at that time. And the night before, that's great. When you wake up, you also want to top off. We say, because just sleeping, you'll use some carbohydrate while you're asleep, and you'll sort of be in a little bit of a deficit at that point. So that's where you top off, and that depending on what your body can handle. So like I'm looking at Marco, I'm looking at Philip, I'm looking at the kids on here. Or you will find out what you can eat for a game. If you eat too close, like for me, I remember loving pasta before a game, but if I was within 2 hours, I would vomit. And you saw it, Phil. Remember, we had that one Stowe game. My spaghetti was hanging
Yeah.
out, my
Yeah.
mask, it was disgusting. I remember Stags was all over me for that. And that was too close. So you got to time it, step backwards 2 hours. You should have your last full meal around that time, hour and a half at the closest, but probably 2 hours out. And as you get closer, that's where I would just be sipping a little bit on those Gatorades or Powerades as you get up to game time, or maybe a piece of fruit that's easy like a banana.
Um, that's awesome, Mike. And you brought up proteins, which was something I was kind of curious about on two fronts. Like, um, one, like, and I know like before a game, from what I understand, you probably don't want to have like a hearty, solid protein, for the reasons that you were just explaining. But I guess the first question is like, what are your thoughts on that post game? Because I know the protein can help from a recovery perspective. And then I guess kind of maybe leading into the second um, like topic of conversation, how does that relate to like any strength training when they're doing off ice and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so yeah, sticking around the game time perspective, this we call it peri workout. So before, during, and after your workout, your ice time. Yeah, you would not want to like focus on the pregame meal on protein. It can have protein, but that's not your time to like up your total daily intake or anything. You're preparing for a game. That's the thing. You want to peak for that game, which is 2 hours from now, let's say. You could have like a chicken breast in there or fish or whatever you're having, meatballs or something in that spaghetti that's 2 hours before, which is no problem. But you wouldn't like slam a protein shake or anything. That would do you. There's really not a purpose to that before a game scenario. That's something you would do after the game, and that's again where you can have more time to digest it. You've got the ability to use it for many different purposes, but one of those is rebuilding your damaged muscle, because when you're contracting your muscle that hard and when you start you probably sore already after some games, but when you get to a place where you're hitting and checking, now you're
Henry,
sore
please stop.
for other reasons too. So yeah, plenty of things.
Cool. Um, Brady, did you have a
Yeah.
question? Looks like there's a couple questions. Why don't you guys go ahead?
Yeah, so I'm a vegetarian. Do you know what would help me to like gain some protein and stuff before games or anything that would help?
Yeah, so vegetarians can do this no problem at all. You can certainly do this without an animal-based diet. So Brady, don't worry about that one bit. There are just a couple of things that a vegetarian athlete would need to pay attention to. And with protein, it's where you're getting that protein from. The most common mixture for plant-based protein intake is a mix of rice and beans. That's the most common across the world. If you mix rice and beans, you actually get the proper proteins involved from each source. And now you have complete proteins, which is what most people worry about, is that the plant-based dieters don't get complete proteins unless you're purposefully mixing your plants together. So rice and beans is probably the most common and easiest way to hit that. And it wouldn't be for a pregame purpose, Brady. This would be just general protein intake in your day, that you would focus on those sort of sources. If you eat dairy products, those are good sources as well. What you want to be careful of, and what I see with young athletes who are vegetarian, is it's more like eliminating animal foods, but it's eating junk almost. It's like almost like the potato chip diet. It's just eating bagged foods and stuff like that to get food intake, and it's not really thinking about mixing these together to have the outcome you want. One thing to consider, and this is, Brady, I'm assuming maybe your parents are also vegetarian, and for them as well, when you do that, you oftentimes have to eat a little bit more of it to be able to actually have your body use the same amount of protein inside of your body. So where I would tell maybe someone who's eating animal products to have 15 to 20 grams at a serving for your age, they might have to have 25 to 30 grams to have the same usable amount of protein from that meal. So you just have to eat a little bit more in those cases, but 100% you can be a vegetarian athlete and be an awesome athlete, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lucas.
Go ahead, Lucas.
I have a question. So like before games, like if we have like a double header, like after like the first game, is it okay to like eat a salad with like chicken in it?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be no problem. The only thing I would consider is how close is that next game. If there's several hours, 100%, that's fine. But you're gonna need a carbohydrate source in there. So a salad can have carbohydrates with it, has some with the dressing, it might have some with croutons and stuff. But that would be a place where if you're at like a restaurant that you're eating this or something, that you have the breadsticks with it. You have the roll with it because you want to refill your glucose stores for the next game. So salad's great, but have something with it that's a carbohydrate based food.
Okay, thanks.
Mike, there was a question from one of the dads around, and I think this is one that, probably a lot of parents have. especially as the kids are now getting into checking next year. So I think
Yeah,
what they're seeing is, like you had alluded to earlier, this is like a big time for growth for them, like over the next 3 years. Some kids have already hit it, some haven't. So,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
last night Phil was playing in a Stoga game and he went up against a kid who's, what, maybe like in seventh grade or eighth
Yeah.
grade. And he's like 6 feet tall and, 200 something pounds, right? So there's a big gap there. And I guess then the question is like, what kind of work in the gym, one is safe, and then two is beneficial for kids this age at the rate they're growing. I think there's some concern around, well, you don't want to mess with, like, you don't want to stunt their growth, right? Like
yeah,
you hear that, fact or myth,
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
it is. And I think there's just a lot of unknowns out there around what is appropriate for boys this age that are already as active as they already are. I mean, these kids are skating 7+ times a week already, and doing off ice stuff. So
yeah. No, that's really good point. Um, Little Phil, did you have another thing to add to that?
Oh, I forgot my question.
You can hit it up later. Let me close the chapter on that previous topic real quick, just so to wrap it up. Carbohydrates fuel your exercise performance in this sport. So make sure you have carbohydrates in before game and after game. After that scenario, now it sounds like we've been talking about these double scenarios, so it's kind of extended. But if you're having one game a day, that's where you would sort of front and back load those carbohydrates for performance. The recovery piece is protein, and you're looking for roughly 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if you weigh 75 pounds, you'll be trying to hit 75 grams of protein in your diet.
per day.
Per day, correct, per day. And the night before, yeah, you can have a normal meal, but stay away from stuff that might upset your stomach, and you'll all have individual needs for that. All right, now I can move into your question, Phil. I also see some hands. Where do you want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you just roll and then we'll run down the
Yeah.
line here.
So checkings next year, what exercise would you say is like the best for like hitting power? Like your like power and like your checking.
Yeah, okay. So let's open this whole conversation up, Phil, because there's a lot to discuss and unpack in that topic. And we can talk about nutrition that will actually help with like concussion and stuff as well, because that's a possibility. I remember, Phil, my first time I got knocked out playing hockey was from Tommy Jacob playing Malvern Prep. And I came around the net with my head down, and that was the last time I did that because I didn't wake up. And then when I did, it was over. Tommy was bigger than I was at that point. So
You weren't the only victim, I think, of his. So don't think.
yeah, and so I remember that very clearly because it just provided me an opportunity to learn from it. One, keep my head too far down, come around the back of the net, and then also what can we do in these other instances to help with it? So for the parents on the call, let me maybe surprise you with some nutritional information, which is at this age, there is data growing that you can stop and limit traumatic brain injury and concussion symptoms by preloading with creatine monohydrate. So that is something that I would certainly be getting into at the start of a sport where hitting is involved. If I had a kid in football or hockey now, I would be doing that. And just a low dose, because you don't need a ton of it. You just need it for a long time. And at this age, I probably do 2 to 3 grams a day and just maintain that, because you can't take it after they get a concussion and have the benefit. It has to already be in order for that to be of any potential benefit. So number one, there are some things along those lines. The other one is fish oil and fish in their diets. So for our vegetarian friend, if you eat fish, good. For the adults on here, sometimes I know like kids won't eat fish or whatever, but they might take fish oil supplements, and a lot of your brain is actually made up of these phospholipids and things that are come in these fish oils. And so they are one other way to nutritionally try to protect yourself and limit some damage that could come from hitting your head repeatedly. So nutritionally, pretty neat. There are some things you can look into. I'll carry on with the exercise part, but I see a hand up.
You got 2 hands here. Go.
I have a question. Like before a game, like, can you eat like a protein shake?
So we sort of covered the protein bit, but I want to just reiterate for you so it's clear. You can, but that's not the primary purpose to take it at that time. I would say that for after the game or before you go to bed later that night, or both. Right before is where I would focus on the carbohydrate side of it and a little bit of protein, but not a chance to, no real need to slug a protein shake at that time. It is not your energy source to provide the fuel to actually play hockey. Next hand.
What about a fruit smoothie before a game?
Yeah, so adding fruit in there is tremendously helpful. And if that is something that doesn't hurt your stomach and settle and like you feel sort of full from it and satiated, but you can still play your best, no problem at all. I'm not saying not to have protein. It's just that shouldn't be your primary thing. So a fruit smoothie would be great. That would be certainly something that would be what I would turn to if a whole food isn't your option. Just know when to back that up. Like how far before the game do you need to take that? For me, like you'll feel it, if you have it too close, it won't be good. So, move that back. I would say minimum 30 minutes, probably because it's liquid, but probably more towards an hour because it's liquid would be appropriate for that fruit smoothie. Yeah, but pack it full of fruit for that. Sometimes, yeah, that would be perfect. All right, so let's look into the training a little bit because that was the question from Phil and Phil. So yeah, there's this thought that we should just get big, right? And I'm going to tell you, between 12 and 16 and 18, you're going to get big. No matter what you do, you're going to get a lot bigger than you are now. A lot of the impact that you drive from a hit, if you're delivering it or if you're receiving it, you have basically 2 or 3 factors to pay attention to. One is balance, core strength, and leg strength. Those 3 things are where I would be focusing my time at this age. It's not really going to be of much benefit to get a big bench press or biceps curl or triceps push down or something. And Big Phil, like, honestly, when I look back at our training those years, I think we did it wrong. I think we were way too focused on vanity muscles instead of hockey muscles. And it gets a little confusing at this age because you're like, oh, I want to look a certain way, which is great because you're boys who are growing into men and you're going to look a lot different. But for hockey, there are certain movements you don't need to be doing. And it's just kind of going through the repetitions and wasting your time. I mean, it's not adding to your game. And there is a place where you can get too big. Like, well, I vividly remember being the biggest I ever was. I came back from preseason in college and came back at like 230 pounds to play my sophomore year. And I had slowed down. My typical playing weight was about 185 to 190. Off season, I'd get to like 200, 205. And that year I went up to 230 training like crazy. And it was too much. And it made it so I moved from a 2nd line player to a 4th line player until they could figure out what to do with me. And it was a big problem. So if I had to do it again, Phil and everybody else on the call, I would focus on leg strength, and that's quadricep, hamstring development, one-legged movements, off balance movements, because you're usually hit in a manner in which you're off balance. And so you need to know how to handle that. So it's not the first time your body's seeing that sort of, weight coming on you. And then for delivering a hit, Phil, like you're basically launching into someone from your legs, like from a quarter squat, you're streaming in and jumping. So the muscular up here will sort of follow suit with leg development. Like you don't really have to purposefully train like traps, for example, like your neck muscles. That'll come with the development you're doing in other areas just by straining and squeezing. And I think those would be the primary areas: single-legged, leg strength, hamstrings, so the back of your legs and the front of your legs. Most of the injuries we see in every sport here are from an imbalance in the quadriceps, so the front of your leg, to the back of your leg. So if you can squat a lot, but you can't curl a lot or deadlift a lot, or Romanian deadlift. Those are terms hopefully maybe Phil and coaches can show you with a broomstick or a hockey stick or something. When that's imbalanced is when we start to see these injuries that come from pulling a hammy, or the groin injuries too. They can come from some of this, barring something unusual. So keeping that balance, making sure you take care of your legs is going to be a priority. And then the core strength too, because every shot you take, every off balance movement you make, pushing, trying to maneuver for positioning, that requires some core strength. So hopefully in your off ice drills, you're working on some of those core strengths, and that can be planks, that can be, any type of sit up movement, that can be ab rolls, that if you're hanging from a bar, that can be knee raises or whatever. But the core part of that will be critical to your development as a hockey player in almost every single way.
And those balance movements, though, those leg training with balance movements, that'll help your core also, because you're trying to align your spine and everything, right?
Yeah, sort of all shimmies together. So I would spend some time individually, but they're all mixed together. Like if you're doing a decent squat, your core's braced, you're still working your core. If you're doing a single leg squat on a bench, you're bracing everything to stay aligned. So yes, all of this will be linked together 100%. My main point is, like, you don't have to be lifting biceps. It's not,
Right.
it's not really important for this. You might put some of it in there, but a primary focus, you're not a bodybuilder. And that's how I used to train, to try to look like a bodybuilder, but play ice hockey. And it just didn't match up right. And I wish I had done that differently.
So, Mike, you're talking about training and weightlifting. What's the right weight for? Should these guys start using weights? Body weight really focus? Lightweight? What do you suggest?
Yeah, so there's like an old school thought on that shifted over time. And I think last year's discussion, we talked a little bit about it with the other group, but I remember getting my first weight set and then having it taken away from me, because it was, oh, I want to lift weights. And then, my parents had heard, oh, it's going to stunt your growth, so they took it away. At this point, strength training in a safe way is completely, not only safe, but it's recommended. All of the literature, the scientific data on strength training in children shows neurological benefits, the biomechanical movement efficiencies that come from that are really, really good. But to your point, Mike, it's not with heavy weight and at this age, and it's also not, and it's always supervised at these younger ages as well. The first thing I would do, Mike, would be body weight. Or I would do, scale up to maybe just using a bar, which is 45 pounds over time, and start with some PVC pipes. You can get, a whole bunch of them at Home Depot and use those for dry land activities just to move through the movements. Because if you get a good movement pattern at this age, once you start adding more weight, it'll just come on so much more naturally when they're 14, 15, as opposed to, not getting that skill until you're 17, 18. You get 2 more years of strength development if you know the movement already. And so with that, I would be doing the back squats, front squats, single leg squats with dumbbells, or with even just body weights, perfect at this age. I would be doing lateral movements also, and that can be done with any household items if that's easy. It could be done with stuff from their hockey bags even. Those movements would be great. Phil, I don't know if you remember this, we used to push cars around. So we'd get somebody with a car and apply a brake, and then we would just try to drive it forward, in neutral. And so some of those leg pushes are good. You don't need to use a car and get run over, but figure out a way to push a sled in some way, which would be really good developmentally for quadriceps strength. And then speed. Don't lose your speed, kids. You want to strength train, but you also need to move the weight in certain patterns. So there'll be occasions to get the movement just right in a slow motion. But then once you get the motion, you need to do it fast, and you need to work on that burst development, because in ice hockey, it's not just strength. If you can't move that strength, you're useless. So it's strength and velocity of movement, because the rapid footwork, just like you do for a fast start off the line, you would practice that weighted. So if someone's holding you, can still jump and get to the puck, for example, out of that type of a movement. So maybe that was too much, Mike, but I'm going through sort of body weights to start with this. Add weight lightly, make sure it's supervised until they're probably until they demonstrate that they can do it safely with no problems. And then I don't know. I remember when the parents used to walk away, we'd then be like, "Oh, I'm strong. I can throw all this weight on," and then we get hurt. So really, there's no point in trying to demonstrate how strong you are. Move efficiently, move the weight through that full range of motion, and the strength is going to just come on as you move through the next 5-6 years.
So on staying on weight training and strength training, is there a different type of training to do in season versus off season, or out of season? So the season here is kind of wrapping up. Kids are looking to get into tryouts. They're going to be coming to spring, summer. Should they be training differently during spring, summer versus fall, winter when they're playing?
Yeah, so in season definitely requires a change. Hockey's, at least the way that I'm seeing it now, it's there are seasons, but they're also all year. If the one season's ending, they're starting the next one. So you're gonna have to, I would prioritize whatever one you need to prioritize is your in season. And then the other stuff was where you would start trying to add the weight training in a little bit more. When you're in season, typically the volume goes way down for weight training. So if you were able, let's say off season, you're able to lift weights 3 days a week. In season is probably one, if you're lucky, two, but probably one day. And what you want to do is just make sure you keep your intensity high. So instead of sort of ramping volume up and bringing intensity down and doing multiple days, you simply drop your volume and you keep your intensity high in the key lifts. So making sure you're doing a front of the leg movement, a back of the leg movement, something explosive, and some abdominals, for example. And that's your whole thing in season, because you do have to focus on skill development. You do have to focus on rest and recovery to play the next game. So much of that development for strength needs to come in the off season and try to be maintained, which is very hard to do, but maintain as best you can in season. And then you rebuild the next year. It's like a stair step. You get up, you try to maintain, you finish the season, you stair up again, and you try to keep going that way.
Mike, is there like a handful of movements that you might suggest? I know you just gave some great examples for movements that focus on the leg muscles. Um, you know, in the off season, as kids maybe, once they get to the point where, they're either using a bar or some very light weights, like, are there other movements that you would suggest, trying out that could be helpful? Outside of bench, anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. And let me just clarify too, weights can be added, but not until there's demonstration the movement can be done safely.
Mm-hmm.
So if Philip demonstrates he can do a back squat safely and repeatedly over several weeks, I would start adding weight. Like, you can do it with heavier weights for him. It's not that you have to shy away from it. It's not going to stunt your growth or any of that, but I would not do it until the mechanics are there to actually perform that movement safely. So just a caveat with that. So what I was saying earlier was where I would focus, but there are some auxiliary things which would be helpful. Your back is a gigantic muscle and it is involved in all of your movements as well. And so there are probably some like latissimus dorsi exercises that I would add in there, because that'll be used for a lot of your motions. Grip strength is something that is often neglected and something that can be worked on at this age as well. Because if you're not going to drop your stick, you're now effective. If someone's going to slash your stick and you drop it every time, you're in trouble. And that's not something we work on a lot. Hockey's great because it does inherently increase your grip strength, but you would purposefully work on that. And that can be rolling up, cut a stick off and roll up a weight that's attached to it and then roll it back in the reverse manner. That could be farmers carries, where you give them some heavier weights to hold and walk 100 meters and back, for example. Those are some effective movements for grip strength. And then I would probably do some back exercises. So if you have the luxury of some weights, that would be like a lat pull down. But if you have just a bar, pull-ups are such a great exercise. that is something that is very hard to do. And once you get it right, it's something that you'll be astonished how much that's important in different movements. But that'll work your lats, that'll work your core, that'll work your shoulders, that'll work your arms. So it's a way to sort of get a full body movement in one. I mean, if I'm totally crushed on time, I will probably do a back squat and a pull up. And that's it. And that's going to get my entire body pretty well, just from how hard those movements can be over time. But that's where I would go, Phil.
Cool.
I used to do, you remember, like we would try to lift all this weight with bench press, but it's not really a great movement for what this is. What we're trying to do, develop young athletes into hockey players. And you can't neglect it entirely. So once in a while, throw it in there for a little maintenance or whatever, but there's no need to prioritize it. Some of that chest strength would come just from other things, because you need the ability, all right, to push off of somebody, to get off the ice really quick and pop up. And so people always say, like, don't do burpees. They're such a useless movement. I'm like, how many times do you have to jump off the ice like that? You're down on your stomach and you need to jump up. Like, that's an important movement for hockey players to develop how to do a burpee right. You fly down on your face and you got to stand back up quickly, and you're on skates. So, you know, those are some practical movements. I would really take the coaches and I think through, if I'm taking a shot, getting hit, or full sprint, what muscles am I using? What should I actually be using and developing here in my off ice type activities? And to Michael's point, like off season, in season, you can change your volume a little bit. In season, it's so hard. You said they're playing 7 days a week. Like, where are you going to fit weight training in? And so I would, in an ideal scenario, wish that wasn't as much ice time and you had a day a week dedicated to this, because it's just at some point at 12 years old, it's too much, frankly.
Yeah, that's an ongoing topic of conversation, I think, for everyone in the hockey community right now, for sure. Mike, I know I want to be mindful of your time. I appreciate you doing this with all of us, but maybe just like a good opportunity to segue into sleep and recovery. I think that it's tough, right? Like, one of the things that I think about with Phil and Henry, for that matter, too, right? They wake up early to go to school. They're off to school there all day. They come home. They maybe have a little bit of downtime. They're off to practice. They come back. They're eating again, and, you know, doing whatever they do, going to sleep, waking up, and doing it all over again the next day. So try to, and then of course, you know, you have throughout the season your sicknesses and your injuries. So I know we and a lot of others really try and stress the importance of sleep and taking the time to, like, let their bodies properly recover, because they are, I mean, these kids are so active.
Yeah, sleep is such a tool that you realize is useful when you're our age, and at the kids' age, you wish you just didn't have to do it. And it's one of those things, like you'd give anything now for a nap and a little more sleep time. And when you're younger, it's just not what you're thinking about. Like, you just want to go all the time, stay up later, 5 more minutes, you know, this and that. But I'll tell you, all the kids on the call, like, I've been researching in our facility here, sleep in different ways for the last 10 years, and really hard the last 6 years in athletes. And when we look at the data that exists, and there's some really cool work in basketball, so it's not hockey, but it's basketball. There's a group out of Stanford that did sleep extension. So what they did is they simply made their athletes get in bed early, and then they asked them to sleep as long as they could, and they were able to extend their sleep by like 30-45 minutes. It went from like 7.5 hours up to just over 8 hours. And over the course of the season, they watched all these people, and when they looked at the groups for more sleep or less sleep, those who had more sleep made more free throws. They had higher percentage win rates. They had higher speed rates in all their drills. Every single metric was firing better when they had more sleep. And so what that means is that for the kids on the call, if you wouldn't wake up early to do it, then don't stay up late to do it. So if you wouldn't wake up early to watch 15 minutes of something before school, don't stay up late to do it. You're borrowing from this side and you're hurting yourself on the backside. And sleep is such an important area. So you're in this growth phase. You're going to want more sleep. Hopefully, you're going to start coming into to knowing that soon. And you're going to require more sleep. Teenagers tend to get 9, 10, 11 hours sometimes if they're allowed to do it. Your schedules won't allow it. So you have to condense your sleep schedule and just take advantage of every second of that. So in the example you gave, Phil, and for the athletes in here, like, I don't know that sleep's a problem for you. Hopefully it's not, but if everything's working well, simply do your best to eliminate distractions and just prioritize it. It's just as important as these other metrics or more at this age, because your parents control your nutrition for the most part. So what you can control is your sleep and going to bed and following a routine that allows you to get the most sleep. If you're hiding in your room, looking at a device with a bright light in your eyes, even if you fall asleep, your quality of sleep will be worse. And so you just have to take steps to do it. Hopefully the parents can manage that too, where you set a time where this stuff goes away to allow them a minute to just, even if they say they feel good, to let their brains recover for a second and bring it back down. Hopefully that's a dimmer type of a time. The lights are dimmed, or it's just soft music or a book or whatever it is. But and you won't be able to do it every night. Believe me, I've got kids too. It doesn't always work. But if you can, a time to sort of decompress is really important. And if you don't value that sleep, you're just hurting yourself. Like, it should be one of the 3 primary things you think about with your ice hockey training and nutrition. You better be adding in the other part of your table, because your table won't stand up if you're missing that 4th leg of sleep.
Awesome.
That was awesome.
Thanks.
That was great, Mike. That's really helpful.
Good.
Yeah,
Well,
really
I love
appreciate it.
talking to my old crew. It's really fun, and I have the pleasure of sort of giving talks all over the world, but I don't get to talk to my friend Phil and all you guys all the time. So this is great. I appreciate the invitation, Phil. If you get questions from folks, just feel free to shoot me a note and
Yeah.
we can talk.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Really appreciate it. Yeah, guys, can't stress it enough. Like, Mike's just a really great example of, what discipline and hard work and tenacity can do. I mean, I didn't mention this earlier, Mike, but I did see you post recently that um, you're on the Men's Health Scientific Advisory Board now. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And that was a cool adventure, and we have a lot of information. So the parents who are on here, I don't know, a lot of times I'll get asked for podcasts and things that we're involved with, bigger ones or whatever. I'm happy to
Yeah.
send those over if any of your parents want links to either managing their own
Yeah.
body composition or
Yeah.
talks about performance or whatever.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, Mike, when we were, 12 years old, could you imagine that would have been the case, huh? I mean, we're like going through these magazines trying to figure out what the hell we should be doing. That's really cool, man. So
Yeah.
congratulations. It's
Thanks, man.
always
Yeah,
a
it was
pleasure
fun.
to
Kind
connect
of
with you.
full circle.
So,
Hey,
yeah.
2 things. One, my wife's a dietitian, and she asked about liquid IV, because she keeps saying, liquid IV is also one that she's been saying these things to me. And, we all know your wife. It's like, okay, you're right. But she was sitting over here earlier when you started, Mike, and she's like, I told you. So what about liquid IV?
Yeah, it's another source that's fine. I tend to think the price isn't worth it for what I think you get out of it, but it's another source that's seems to be just fine. What I see in the college level, once you get up to that level, is an actual IV, and that's a whole other discussion. But the stuff over the counter,
We're not there yet.
Yeah, no need to do that stuff. But the liquid IV is just fine. It's got a different sodium potassium layout than the other drinks I described, which may be important once you know if your son or your daughter, whoever's playing, is a heavy sweater, an excessive sweater, or not. But at this age, if you like it and you have access to it, no problem.
And then perfect. Then the other one was, you mentioned creatine, fish oil. Are there any other supplements you would recommend for kids this age as they're growing and developing.
Yeah, vitamin D is the other one that I would start on. Now listen, I'm not telling you to just take all this stuff. There's very few I would recommend. We are a food first approach, and I believe in that, but there are some things that despite a food first approach, you just cannot get in your diet. One of those is creatine. Vitamin D tends to be tough. And even in Florida, we sometimes don't get enough from the sunshine. So you definitely aren't getting enough from Philadelphia for what you can use. And that's really important for development of musculature and growth and muscle protein synthesis, recovery, and all of it. If your children are okay with eating fruits and vegetables, I would stay there. If you have someone that is totally against it or just will not do it, that's when I would consider something like a multi vitamin or mineral for somebody. Yeah, we get access to these like green supplements and stuff that people send me all the time, and I've tried these and they're fine, but they would be like an emergency for me if I've missed my vegetables like all day and I need something. Otherwise, I'm not taking this. I'm going to be eating broccoli and salads and whatever.
Right.
Cool. Well, Mike, thank you very much, man. Really, really appreciate it.
Awesome.
All right, y'all are welcome. Go Birds, right? Let's
Yes,
go.
sir. Yes,
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All right,
thanks,
y'all are
Mikey.
welcome. Okay, bye y'all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.